Our historically low unemployment rate, 3.5%, should be something to celebrate. But what the numbers don't show is a steady drift among those at the lower end of the job market towards the disability sector, most commonly for psychosocial reasons. Now, this is captured by the blowout in disability and NDIS payments, and critics claim the system actually discourages independent capability, encouraging people to take on the role of being sick, not suggesting for a second there isn't legitimacy for the majority of people to be part of the NDIS. But we've got a large proportion of the population who are no longer attracted to the dignity and pride being in work and engenders. Not like previous generations, certainly. So joining me now to discuss all of this, discuss the psychology of those job numbers, is psychiatrist Dr Tanveer Ahmed. Tanveer, thank you very much for coming in. We've got the carrots around the wrong way here. Those who receive disability support fear losing payments if they enter the job market. That's certainly correct. You've seen this and you acknowledge that.
And look, you mentioned the critics. Some of the critics are the people who are suffering the disability themselves. So I'll have patients, particularly many on the autism spectrum, and the reality is they might have had trouble working, they're lacking confidence, and sometimes as soon as they get back to work in some form, and they might have early success, but there's so much risk for them, because if it doesn't go well straight away, they can lose their payments and they can be in real trouble. So
then the process of getting back on them is a difficult one,
can be quite challenging. So I think what's going at the bottom of the labour market is fundamentally changed from generations past. You've said, and a similar thing happened in Britain. You know, pre-Brexit debate, there was a lot of things about immigration, etc. And one of the things that came up, and even the famous chefs, etc., would talk about how a lot of the British were no longer interested in many of the jobs, where it's, be it retail or cafes. I think we've all, and there was a term used, failures and foreigners. That's what was seen as people who would work in those jobs. And I said the same, where it's like I think there's large groups, many jobs now that are just seen as, we're not interested. If you're a local Australian citizen, you won't do them. You'll never find anyone.
I can't tell you the number of small business owners and medium business owners who express that same opinion.
Exactly. So I think something's changed where as people are expecting to have different expectations about work, they expect to have something quite fulfilling or their dream job almost straight away. They won't go for something they think.
So how do we incentivise this? How do we rejig the system to make it more encouraging for the burgeoning psychologically disabled to get back to work?
Yeah. So look at some of the numbers. So we've got super low unemployment rate. NDIS is approaching 700,000 people. NDIS, there's becoming a real almost outright economy there, right? I think we need a stepped-up system that we're not doing well. And we can do some deep work around this, and I tend to be part of it, where you really need a steep system where you make little attempts to work, you can still keep your payments. There's a little bit of that, but I think it should almost be like a 2-year path. Something along those lines, that over the 2 years, we're going to try and get you back into work. And that period, you don't necessarily lose your payments, because it almost takes that long. So
to have an overlap, you mean?
I'm not suggesting, people are disabled addicts, but there's actually overlaps with addiction, because there's a behaviour change and psychological change that takes a really long time, and you need to set up new structures, new habits, and it takes, I reckon, almost 2 years.
And it is habitual, isn't it?
Exactly.
If you have a lifestyle that relies on that, and not a lifestyle that knocks on doors for jobs.
I think half of NDIS now is psychological, right? So when it's advertised, it's always people with the amputee, physical disability. That's not the norm.
Yeah.
And one in 3 NDIS sufferers have an autism diagnosis. So that's extraordinary. But what's happening is if you think 50-50, the way incentives are set up, if someone's sort of got a bit of confidence, they'd like to go back to work, but they're still a bit shaky, the way our systems are set up is stay on your disability. That's the way our current systems are set up.
OK, we look at the headline number of unemployment, 3.5%, 3.3% in New South Wales, the biggest state, but we can't find workers, even with so many on job seeker and disability support payments. What does that tell you, and what do we do about it?
Well, we're effectively at full employment.
Yes.
So anybody who really wants a job can get it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole set of people that either worries that they might have a go and fail. I think there's a lot of jobs just seen as unattractive. So that dignity we're talking about in previous generations. And interestingly, in the past decade, you know who talked about this? Modi, the Indian leader, came to Australia and said, what I love about the Western world is that there's this innate dignity of any labour. He was a tea seller. Yeah. In India, they used to look down on that.
Yeah.
And in fact, now we've flipped.
Yeah.
So now we look down on people, oh, you're washing the dishes, etc. You know, we've lost the really fundamental part of our society there.
The pride that a job engenders, you can't value too much, can you?
I think now we're almost elevating, and look, I want to support everyone with a disability, but now identity politics almost elevates and celebrates a disability identity, and that's almost higher status than having what might be seen as a lowly job.
You're supported a lot publicly. You're exactly right. Tanveer Ahmed, thank you very much. Good work. Thank you very much for that.
Pleasure, mate.